Okay, so the summer's upon us and we're sort of diverting from series and we're back to Route 66 and I was delegated Nehemiah. And so, Nehemiah. This book is the last of the historical books in the Old Testament, and it recounts the third return to Jerusalem in 445 to 432 BC, for people who like their dates, and it was Nehemiah who led this return. The first return to Jerusalem was in 538 BC, led by Zerubbabel. And then the second return to Jerusalem was led by Ezra, much easier to say, around 458 BC. So over a few hundred years, there's been this continual return to Jerusalem to try and mend it, because it was very broken, physically and mentally. So Nehemiah's return to Jerusalem saw the rebuilding of the walls around the city, but it was also where he went to bring renewal to the faith of the people there. Unusually, it seems this book was actually written by Nehemiah. Quite often now it seems to be, we don't know who it was. And probably edited by Ezra, who was around at the same time. So when Nehemiah learnt of what was going on in Jerusalem, he started his whole thought process about what could be done. He was very concerned about it. And the first thing that he did was he took his concerns to God in prayer. And this is what he said, and this is from Nehemiah 1:5, verses 5 to 11. Then I said, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. We have acted very wickedly towards you. We have not obeyed the commands, decrees, and laws you gave your servant Moses. Remember the instructions you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the furthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. They are your servants and your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favour in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. And God heard his prayers, and Nehemiah was successful in going back to Jerusalem and rebuilding the walls and renewing the faith. But who was this Nehemiah that God had chosen? So he was born in Persia to Jewish parents. In fact, he'd never been to Israel. He was born in exile. But he strictly followed the Jewish tradition. He was brought up a good Jewish boy. And he rose through the king's household to become cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, something like that anyway. And that was a very valued and highly valued position. And he was actually given special dispensation to drink the Gentiles' wine, because true Jews weren't supposed to do that. But if he was going to be tasting the food and wine for the king, he needed to be able to do that. And I think they thought that it was, we'll let him do that because he's in a good position, could come in handy one day, which it did. So he was sent by God to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls and renew people's faith. Now, you have to, when I was reading this, I've also been undergoing a lot of applications, been doing a lot of applications for jobs and things. And I started thinking about God's whole recruitment process for how he gets people to do things. I have to say, it's very different to the civil service. Okay, so 35 years ago, I applied to be executive officer in the civil service, and it was basically you filled in an application form which really covered your whole life story, everything you'd ever done or said was virtually. Getting through that, then you were invited to a huge hall, a very dark, dingy hall, from what I remember, with loads and loads of desks, like an exam room, and you sat there for 2 hours doing these sort of logistical tests and things. And then when you finally get through that, which somehow I did, you then got to the interview process, which was in another very imposing room with 4 chairs raised up on a dais and 4 very mature, fusty old men in suits looking down on you as you sat in that lone chair in front of them. Absolutely terrifying, I have to say. And but their whole focus was really on your academic roles. Your background seemed to be very interesting to them, and what you'd done in the past. So that was their focus. If we move on 35 years, for some reason I found myself applying for the civil service again in a similar role. And they've got a whole new format to do it. But I have to say it's still not very easy. So you go online, you give a little bit about yourself, very briefly, nothing to do with your gender, age, it's all sort of quite neutral, that bit. But then you answer 20 questions of how you would react in different scenarios. If you get through that, you then go on to what they call a recorded pre-interview session, where you sit in front, a bit like how we used to record the talks, and sit there and you'd read the question. They give you 60 seconds to think about an answer, and then you'd reply, and you had 6 of those to do. I don't know what the next process is, because I don't think I've got through that one, but I think it's another interview. But the whole difference with the new way they do it is they are focusing on your behaviour in situations. They're not looking so much about all the academic stuff, although that probably comes into it later. But at the beginning, they're looking at how you react, your evidence of how you've behaved in certain situations, your behaviours. So if we can, I don't know how clear, this is the different behaviours they're looking at, okay, quite comprehensive. So we're looking at seeing the big picture. You know, do you understand how your role fits in with the whole civil service as a whole? So this is like Ezra seeing the big picture. Where rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem is important. To furthering God's kingdom, changing and improving. So looking for ways. You're actually looking for ways to create change, which is what Nehemiah did. He said to God, "What can I do?" Making effective decisions. Nehemiah made the decision to talk to the king, and then when he got to Jerusalem, he made a lot more effective decisions as well to make sure that the work got going, and up against some very difficult behaviour he met. Leadership, well, he obviously led them very well, because it was in a very effective rebuilding process. Only took 52 days, so that was pretty good. And communicating and influencing, well, as I said, he had some very difficult and awkward people within the Jewish community as well as outside in the neighbouring areas. And so working together was important as well. And then developing self and others. Well, he then went on to start developing the people, the Jewish people, in their faith. And bringing them back to God and celebrating God in the right way. Managing a quality service, well, I think he was very effective in that, what he did. And then delivering at a pace. Well, I think, as I said, completing the wall in 52 days, pretty good going on the whole. So That's the sort of thing that the civil service are looking for. The thing is, Nehemiah wouldn't have got picked based on this, because all the things that I've mentioned that he did were not before he applied for the job. They were all things that he went on to do. But if he was being recruited by the civil service, they wouldn't have known that he was able to go on to do. If they looked at his background, they wouldn't have seen that he had the potential to do all these things. So Nehemiah ticked all these boxes, but after his work was done, he would say he would have had no hope of ticking all these boxes before. So when it comes to God's recruitment, he's looking for something different, a different type of person, something that the civil service is probably not looking for. And a clue to this is in 1 Corinthians. This is from the Message. This is 1 verses 26 to 31. Take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and the best among you, not many influential, not many from high society families. Yes, certainly not the sort of thing the civil service was looking for, certainly not 35 years ago. So, God's recruitment process is a little backwards to everybody else. He's not looking for the best, he's almost looking for the worst, in a way. So God is not always looking for someone who can tick all the boxes before they think they are ready to serve. He does things differently, because the fact is that God knows everything about you already. So he doesn't have to ask you all these questions. The question is whether we are willing to be ready for him. Because God can see what you were, what you are, and what you are going to be. He knows absolutely everything there is about you. In Psalm 139, verses 13 to 16, he says, "Oh yes, you shaped me first inside, then out. You formed me in my mother's womb. I thank you, high God, you're breathtaking. Body and soul, I am marvellously made. I worship in adoration. What a creation. You know me inside and out. You know every bone in my body. You know exactly how I was made, bit by bit. How I was sculpted from nothing into something. Like an open book, you watch me grow from conception to birth. All the stages of my life were spread out before you. The days of my life all prepared before I'd even lived one day." Now, Nehemiah was chosen because he was a man of character, he was a man of persistence, and he was a man of prayer, basically. He wasn't chosen because he ticked all those boxes. But God knew his potential. He was God's chosen servant for the third rebuilding of Jerusalem, because he was designed to be in the right place at the right time. Unlike the civil service, recruitment processes, unlike the civil service, God's recruitment processes recruits all those who apply to him to serve. God looks at your personality, your experiences, and your training, and how it shapes you in the preparation for his purposes. God has seen you from the day you were born to now. He's watched you, and throughout that time he's known you, and at times he's been guiding you, and at times he's been gently pushing you or steering you so that you are where you need to be in order to do what God wants you to do. So God's hiring process is a little different to most of what we expect. So, well, for start off, hiring today, God is always hiring. Okay, there's no closing date for this job. There was no start date. Well, started when mankind was created, I suppose. God is constantly hiring because there's so much work to be done. Okay? The roles he's hiring for, well, various, I think, just to put it mildly. I mean, we have no idea what we are being recruited for. God knows, because he knows everything. But often throughout our life, we're wandering and you're thinking, well, you know, what am I here for? What's God? You know, I don't feel like I'm doing anything for God. Well, that's not true. A lot of the times we don't recognise when we actually are doing things for God, because the roles are so varied. I mean, we don't often get called to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, but we could be called to rebuild the walls of relationships. You know, it's not all the Nehemiahs. It's often just the Good Samaritans, just a helping hand at a certain time. The salary, well, you know, as we all know in the church, most often it's nothing. You know? But the salary can be infinite, really, because our rewards are in heaven, and well, it can't get much better than that. But that doesn't mean to say that people don't, you know, God doesn't steer people into well-paid jobs, and especially those with a heart for God, because they are then influential and they have money to help people. So the start date, well, you just don't know, you know. Sadly, some people are in this world only for a few days, a few months, but in that short time, God can use them to change people's lives. Some people feel like they've got to the end of their lives and they really don't know what they've done. They feel, well, I haven't really earned my place in heaven. I haven't really, you know, been a good Christian. I haven't really done this and that. And the fact is that they have, well, maybe they still have time to do something. You know, we have no time scale in this, you know. And there are some people who just seem to bring joy throughout their lives, you know. I could think of Ian's dad, a man who just smiled and made you feel better. And Sally's dad, who just, you know, I just loved being around. He had so much knowledge to give. And, you know, there's a lot of people who, you know, just share themselves with others. And they may not see that as a role. And they may not even think they believe in God, but they are doing God's work. So the length of contract, well, that really, for some roles, it can seem that there is a season while we do them, at a certain time scale. And that may be for various reasons. A project will last so long, and then for some reason we have to step back. It could even just be for 5 minutes, that conversation with a neighbour that made all that difference to that person's well-being that day, and that then went on to change the rest of the week, and who knows what afterwards, you know. I mean, as Christians, we have a role throughout our lives, but with all of us, there is a little something that's different, that makes us different to everybody else and makes us unique, that we contribute. So the contact details, how do you apply for this job? Okay, assuming you want to apply. And when you think about the rewards, about how this world is changed by all these various roles that are undergone, I would argue that there's no reason not to. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't involve long tests, long interview processes, horrible Zoom meetings. It's basically just involves you accepting Christ into your life and then asking him, what do you want me to do? Bringing to him all those situations that we are in at the moment. And as we heard from Caroline, Maswell's going through a lot at the moment. And often in situations like that, especially with bereavement, you just don't know what to do. You want to help, but you don't know what to do, what to say. And that's situations like that, all we can do is bring it to God. Say to God, I'd like to help, I'd like to make things better, and leave it with him. If it is our role to do something specific, he will make it known to us. If it's our role just to be praying for them, then that's good enough for God, There's lots of roles, and they're all equally valuable because they all add and contribute to the bringing of God's kingdom into this world. And we really need that at this moment. I'm beginning to think I might not keep looking at the news in the morning. It's just getting so depressing. But I have hope. I have hope, and all I can do is say to God in the morning, what can I do? And that's all we can ask for, really, isn't it? The rest is up to God. So I'm going to leave you with those thoughts. I'm going to leave you with thinking about, if you wanted God to hire you today, what would you like him to be hiring you for? Or if you've got no idea how you can help God or anyone, ask him, what's available. Go and look on the vacancies page, see what's being advertised today. Thank you.